It's me, Carmine DeStefano, the Bookman. And with a new Final Fantasy title upon us, what better way to celebrate the entire series than talk about how it's overrated? Now I'm talking about the main numbered titles, not the spin-offs or the sequels to the sequels. Just the main games that I have played through most of and have seen the rest that I haven't. And really when it comes down to it, you have about 14 separate, independent storylines in areas that are not really connected to one another, with the exceptions being chocobos, moogles, airships, summons, and guys named Sid. You also have, usually, the main character being some weird-haired freak that can't speak to women, yet for some reason always has the most coveted woman chasing after her. Now it's your typical old-fashioned JRPG turn-based strategy where you walk around a giant map, get into random battles, and hit, fight, magic, or skill, and wait. And I mean that's the way it's been until maybe the 11th one, which was an MMORPG. You hit fight, you hit magic, or skill, and wait. You walk around the map, you get into random encounters, do the same thing over and over and over again. And seeing as how these games don't really offer any kind of side quests which result in experience points that you could add to the experience points you're already getting from battles, you really have to spend hours upon hours grinding through these slow-paced, boring-ass battles with random enemies. I also loved how people were talking about the 13th one being the downfall of Final Fantasy, that it sort of was hitting its apex then stopped at that point, seeing as how to me the 13th one was the most enjoyable of all the ones I've played. It offered some other aspects that you could involve yourself in, and with Final Fantasy there was a lot of confusing shit that goes on, a lot of elements that they don't fully understand that would require you to spend another 2 or 3 hours reading through tutorial information. So really, aside from breeding chocobos or playing card games with no real sense, there's not a chance for you to build your characters up other than the random encounters. And that's why the 13th one was most enjoyable, because the fighting mechanics were a lot different, a lot more fast-paced. But people still didn't like it because of that, and also them saying that it was very linear. But Final Fantasy is very linear. You are guided step by step by step throughout the entire game in a specific order based on not having vehicles that are necessary to get to different areas, or not being strong enough to face enemies in different areas, or being too strong and facing too many weak enemies that are not going to grant you any kind of experience points. And not only that, as the years progressed, the leveling up system became even more convoluted. It made no sense, with grid spheres and all this other bullshit that basically required you to find specific items around the world just to level your characters up and help them learn the better skills. And the characters were carbon copy, cookie cutter bullshit characters, none of which really stood out. With the exception of maybe Rydia and Auron, there wasn't anyone that really made themselves known in any real facet. And the enemies are your typical JRPG, over-the-top, maniacal, laughing goofballs that only want to destroy the world. And how they go about it leads to another big issue with the games. The storylines and reasonings are so broken and make no sense. Whether it's the first boss you face going back in time to become the ultimate destructive force, or selling a soul to Satan, or fighting a giant floating humpback whale called Sin, or whatever else they had, none of these villains really had any kind of motivations that made any sort of sense. And the storyline suffered for that. Not to mention the fact that these destructive forces had some of the weakest and flimsiest names and ideas you've ever heard. Whether it's biogenically created monkey people destroying everything, or it's something called Nethicite, or a Lassie and a Fal'Cie. It's so hard to take anything seriously with these games, seeing as how over-the-top, clownish, and ill-conceived every single storyline and motivation really is. But despite all these glaring issues and problems with the games, people still herald them as some of the greatest games of all time. Now, I'm not going to say it doesn't have its place in history. I'm not going to say that these games all sucked. Some of them were pretty good. The only problem is that when you look back at the memories themselves, they're a lot fonder than the actual game experience when you go and play them again. We have evolved and these games didn't. In fact, there were other games that were of less popularity that did more things with the battle mechanics and actual role-playing game elements than Final Fantasy did throughout the years while it was still being praised. Now you could tell with the soundtracks, I mean, for Christ's sakes, Final Fantasy IV boss fight, that's legendary in itself. The music, the graphics, you can see that Square Enix or Squaresoft really put a lot of effort into these games, which makes you wonder how they failed in so many obvious elements. They were at one point fun to play, but they did not withstand the test of time. And because of that, they cannot be considered some of the great games you'll ever involve yourself in. Overall, such flawed games being so highly praised makes Final Fantasy overrated. Now, thank you all for watching. I have more for you soon to come, so stay tuned, take care, and have a great day.